All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'd recommend downloading assignment number 11 because that's what we're going to be talking about today, as well as we're going to get started on it as a class, so you'll be able to get a few of the answers for Part B. So I'd recommend downloading it now. General structure of today is going to be, I'm going to talk about some common problems for assignment number 10 that I found. Then we're going to jump into talking about assignment number 11. We're going to go over a correlational matrix output. We're going to do a little bit of part B, and then you're going to have some time to work together as a group to work on part C. But we'll get into that in a little bit. All right, first, so here are some common problems that I found on assignment number 10, which you all should have received this weekend. Some people struggled a little bit, I think, with understanding what exactly a t-test does. I think people really overthought this. At a very basic level, a t-test just assesses the difference between two groups on one variable. And it determines to see if there's a statistically significant difference between the two. So for example, if we took the average test grade of, let's say exam number 3, I think you just took, you take the average grade for this class and you compared it to the average grade of last year's class, you could run a t-test to see if the grades in this class differed from the grades in the previous class. I got a lot of weird write-ups and interpretations of things that just made it so that really people did not understand what a t-test is. So please make sure you understand that it's just simply looking at the differences between two groups for one variable. Some people struggled with determining if something is significant or not on SPSS. P-values, which may be referred to as SIG on SPSS, if they range from 0.000 to 0.04999, or they're less than 0.05, it means they're significant. And then you can interpret whatever test you're running as significant. So if you're doing a t-test, it means that the means do differ significantly. If you're running a correlation, which we'll learn about today, it means that your results are significant, so it means your variables are related in some way. P-values from 0.05 to 0.999 are not significant. Some people struggle a little bit with this. I should also mention it determines what alpha level you're using. So typically we use 0.05, so these numbers that I just said work when interpreting it. But sometimes, and we'll tell you when we do, sometimes you use 0.01 for the alpha level. So then it would be numbers ranging from 0.000 to 0.00999. You get what I'm saying. Anything less than 0.01 is significant, but typically we use 0.05. Some people also struggled with the null and the alternative, and this is another one that people really overthought. The null for a t-test simply states that there's no difference between the two groups. Opposite of this, the alternative simply states there is a difference. So your null and alternative hypotheses should be really short, brief, and to the point. There is a difference between X and Y, or there's not a difference between X and Y. You're going to have to do this again for assignment number 11, write a null and alternative hypothesis. Simply there is no relationship between your two variables versus there is a relationship between the two variables. Don't overthink it too much. Are there any questions so far about these three things that I brought up with assignment number 10 before we jump into writing up a t-test? All right. So this was another big problem I saw with assignment number 10, is writing up a t-test appropriately. We give you the framework and pretty much the exact sentence that you need to use whenever writing up your results. It's not plagiarism if you take this sentence exactly. And I actually really recommend that you take this sentence exactly and just put in your own information. So let's go over how to write up a t-test. I'm going to actually, let's see, this. All right, so let's go over how to write up a t-test. So, what do we need? We need what test we're running. So a one sample t-test. Then we need to kind of indicate in Word, we need to interpret in words kind of what was found. So a one sample t-test indicated that Psych 203 students reported significantly And then this is where you mention, is it higher or lower? And whatever variable you're doing. Should also mention that the words in red are things that you need to input with your own data. The things in white should pretty much stay the same. Typically, I like reporting the mean and standard deviation. I know this isn't in some of the examples, but it is in some of the other examples. Typically, I like reporting the mean and standard deviation when you're running a t-test because it lets the reader know, like, hey, here's what the means are for your two groups for that particular variable. So we have one samples t-test indicated that Psych 203 students reported significantly higher or lower, whatever variable you're using, the mean and standard deviation for that group and for that variable. Then previously validated samples, whatever your other group is. Typically on assignment number 10, I believe it was like previously validated samples or a national representative, whatever it is, the mean and standard deviation for that. And then you report your actual test stats. So you have your T, degrees of freedom, equals your T value, P less than 0.05 if it's significant, and your Cohen's d. So what does that look like all written out? I just used the example of openness, one of the big 5 personality traits. A one sample t-test indicated that Psych 203 students reported significantly lower openness, and here's the openness score, or the openness average and standard deviation for Psych 203 students. Then previously validated samples, here's the validated sample average for openness. And then we get into our stats. T101 equals the t-test stat, P less than 0.05, and our Cohen's d. And then at the very end, we have some interpretation of higher scores on the openness scale represent blah, 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 blah. So please use this general framework, like basically this exact sentence when you're running up a t-test, and just put in your own information. It's not plagiarism. Please just do it. It makes your write-up a lot cleaner. And I'm also getting a lot of things that are just wrong. So please use the format we give. You'll also have to do this for assignment number 11 when you write up your correlation output, or your correlation test. Please just follow the framework that we give you. Are there any questions so far about things that I talked about for assignment number 10? You're going to have to incorporate some of these things into your write-ups for your final paper. All right, so let's jump into assignment number 11. Hold on, let me pull this out. I'm actually pulling up assignment number 11 on my own screen. All right, there we go. Okay, so assignment number 11. For this, you're going to be calculating and interpreting correlation coefficients, both by hand. You're going to do one by hand, as well as via SPSS. You're going to write a draft of the data analysis subsection for the methods. And then you're going to write a second draft of your results section, incorporating the feedback I gave you for the t-test, as well as your correlation outputs. The due date for this is this Thursday at midnight. I do have office hours right after today from 4 to 5. So please come make sure your data's fine, or if you have any questions about assignment 11. But I also have hours from 9:30 to 11 and 1 to 2. This is in that email I sent, and it's also going to be at the end of the PowerPoint as well. But please come to these office hours if you have any questions. So let's jump into assignment number 11. Before we jump into it, I have some extra directions that aren't on the actual assignment number 11, but there are some extra directions. They're included in that email I sent. So if you're using a separate piece of paper for your handwritten work, and you should be, because assignment number 11 also has a couple hand calculations that you need to do. What I want to see is you type your answers in the appropriate space on the assignment, then attach the scanned separate papers at the end of the Word document as like a .jpeg. Like just take a picture with your phone of your handwork and then put it at the very, very end of your homework assignment. Answers, and this is key, answers are only going to be graded if they are next to the assignment question. So let me explain what this means. Let me pull up the actual assignment. Okay. So here's the actual assignment. This is what I want to see. And don't write down these answers because they are not correct. I just put them in there for demonstration purposes. But what I want to see is you type in, your null and alternative hypothesis right in the spot that it's supposed to be in. And then you also need to do the symbols. Next, you're going to have to calculate some of the correlation coefficients, and you have to use the formulas that you've learned previously. But you write this by hand on a separate piece of paper, write out all the formulas. But I just want to see the actual answer here. So this is the actual answer. This isn't the actual answer, but let's just pretend that's the actual answer. I want to see it right here. If this answer is not right here, it's not going to be graded. I got a lot of weird formats on assignment 10 where some people would put like step 1 up here, and then all the way on their handwritten work would have like step 2 down here, then step 3 up there. It makes it a nightmare for grading. So please just put all your answers next to where they're supposed to be on assignment, on where they're supposed to be on assignment 11, and then upload your handwritten work. So what do we want to see for the handwritten work? Very simply, like here are the formulas. Put in the formulas, plug them in, and then, circle your final answer if you want. Not necessary, but it's just nice for us when we're grading. But all your handwritten work should be here, uploaded at the very end as like a JPEG, and inserted as a picture, and then all your actual answers on the homework assignment. Once again, you're not going to get any credit if your answers aren't here. And then, so scrolling through, you should have answers next to every one of these slots, not work, just actual answers. And then you write up your APA format, your write-ups where they're supposed to be. Are there any questions so far on what I want to see for assignment number 11? I know these instructions aren't on the actual homework assignment, but this is just my own instructions to make my life easier when grading, and Sarah's life easier when grading these. Because assignment number 10 was a little bit wild with how many different formats we got. All right, if you have any questions about what I just said, please let me know. I'm stating it here, I stated it in an email, and I'm gonna send another email after class restating it, so no excuses, just no points are gonna be given if the answer is not there. Also, make sure you do upload your handwritten work, because that counts for like 2 out of 3 points for some of the questions of if you don't have your handwritten work, you're not gonna get the majority of credit for it. Some other quote unquote rules. Please make sure it's a Word document. I'm getting weird file formats of like .8 files and .pages, which is a Mac thing, and PDFs. Please make sure it's a .doc or a .docx, a Word document. Either just use Microsoft Word or Google Docs, and through Google Docs, you can make it a Word document. Or if you have some other weird program, there's plenty of conversion programs for free online. Please give it to me as a Word document. The reason for this is with formatting issues, your final paper is going to have to be properly formatted. If it's not properly formatted, points are going to be taken off, and the excuse of like, oh, it's not on a Word document, I wasn't sure, it's not going to fly. So just please make sure this homework assignment is on a Word document, you know how to use Word or convert to Word and make it look right. I also leave comments, and leaving comments on Word is just so much easier than like doing a PDF and me creating a new Word document and typing out the comments. Just put it on a Word document. You can get Word through free through WVU, or you can just use Google Docs, which is free for everyone, and convert it as a Word document. Additionally, make sure your graphs and output are pasted appropriately. I'm getting some weird like things where people just paste the output, but it's a weird mumble jumble and it doesn't look right. It's not useful, and you're going to get points taken off on your final paper. So if you have to, I know for some people, copying, pasting really wasn't working right. If you have to, just take a screenshot and crop it so it looks nice and it looks like how SPSS outputs it. Are there any questions so far about these extra directions for assignment 11 or concerns? All right, I'm not seeing any. If you do, please let me know in office hours or through email. But let's jump into the actual assignment number 11. So part A, you should have done an example of this in Dr. Tenenholz's class, but you're going to do some hand calculations for correlation coefficients. You're going to write the null and alternative hypotheses. You're going to actually calculate the correlation coefficient and some descriptive stats. You're going to determine if it's statistically significant. And you're going to calculate and interpret the effect size and do like a mini APA write-up. So you guys should have talked about or done an example of this in class. So I'm just going to briefly, if you have any questions about this afterwards, please let me know and I can help you through it. But today we're going to kind of focus on part B. So if you haven't already, open up assignment 11 because we're going to give you some answers. We're going to work through some answers. for part B, so you're going to have part of it done before the end of class. So right here is the actual scenario from the homework assignment, but going through, we see that some researcher is examining the relationship between a couple of variables. So the variables looks like it's student anxiety levels about a stats class, and the other variables are a teacher rating, student age, and a number of math classes completed. So let's actually look at a correlational matrix that SPSS outputs for this data. All right, so this should be just a nod of heads or shake of heads. Dr. Tenenholtz didn't show you like an SPSS output and go through it, right? Okay. So this is what it looks like. If I say a correlational matrix, this is what I'm referring to, like this is the actual matrix. So let's go through it. So we can see on the left-hand side, our variables are going down. We have anxiety about stats class, teacher rating, age, and number of classes that the student is taking, number of math classes I think they had. But we can also see our variables go along the top row as well. This just makes it easy to determine what correlation you're actually looking at. So let's jump into it. So let's look at the correlation between anxiety and rating. So to do that, we go to anxiety on the left-hand side, or we can start up here. It really doesn't matter. But let's start at anxiety over here and go all the way over to rating. And we know, let me exit this. We know that if we are interested in looking at the correlation between anxiety and rating, we just need to look at these three boxes. And now let's go in a little bit about what these three boxes are. So first we have the Pearson correlation. That is just R, so that's our correlation coefficient. We see that it is negative 0.748. Next, we have whether it's significant or not, and our sig box. So we have sig, and we see that is it significant? Can someone tell me, just shout out, is this significant?
Yes.
Yep. And we know that because it is less than 0.05. SPSS also tells us another way that it's significant. A little nifty asterisk right next to the R value or the correlation coefficient. There's an asterisk right there, and it denotes that, hey, it's significant. And it tells you down here, the correlation is significant at the 0.05 level for a two-tailed test. And all these outputs are going to be in two-tailed tests because we care about it. Even though we make a directional hypothesis, you remember weeks and weeks ago, you made a directional hypothesis and you said, people with higher X will have higher Y, or some version of that. We still care if the result, so that's a one-tailed hypothesis. We want to do two-tailed tests because we still care if the results come in the opposite direction. So let's say you make a prediction that higher X is related to higher Y, but in reality, higher X is related to lower Y. We still care about that, and so that's why we run two-tailed tests. But going back to it, we can identify if something's significant or not by looking at the sig box and seeing if it's less than 0.05, or we can look at the asterisk next to the correlation coefficient. Finally, the other number in a correlational matrix box for a specific correlation is just n. So how many participants there were. I should also note, so if you can see right here, diagonal down, like halfway through the matrix, it's just a bunch of ones. A correlation with itself, a variable correlated with itself is just one. So we can see anxiety correlated with anxiety is one, rating with rating is one, age and age, class and classes, just one. And the way the SPSS outputs a correlational matrix, you really only need to care about numbers either below those ones or above those ones. You can kind of see it's like split in half and we have above and below. It's the exact same thing. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which ones you use. Because if you do a correlation of X to Y, it's still, if you do a correlation of X and Y, is the same thing as doing a correlation of Y to X. So what do I mean by that? So the correlation between anxiety and rating is negative 0.748. Let's go to rating and anxiety, negative 0.748. It doesn't matter in which order you go in. Are there any questions so far about what makes up a correlational matrix and how to interpret a specific correlation? All right, so we're going to start working on part B. Particularly questions 1, 2, and 4, I believe. So can someone tell me what variable is significantly correlated with anxiety?
The rating in classes.
Yep. And can someone tell me how Sarah knew that? How she knew that rating and classes are significantly correlated with anxiety?
Because it's below 0.05.
Yep, it's below 0.05, and we also know that there's an asterisk next to each correlation coefficient, so it's significant. Cool. All right. So let's write this up. I already gave you the first one, but what's the first thing we need to do when writing up APA results for a correlation? Well, it's very similar to a t-test. We need to say what we're actually doing, right? So according to a Pearson correlation analysis, so that should be the very beginning of your APA write-up. So according to a Pearson correlation analysis, what comes next? Someone tell me what comes after this. You don't have to tell me exactly what it should say, but just tell me what's the general gist of what we should be writing.
You should talk about how the two variables are correlated.
Yep. So just in basic words, kind of say what happens. So according to a Pearson correlation analysis, there was a significant linear relationship between anxiety levels and teacher ratings. So those are the, I should have mentioned, we're looking at anxiety and teacher ratings. So that's what you just need to say. You can just talk about kind of in words what was found before we start going into the next part. So once again, we have, according to a Pearson correlation analysis, there was a significant linear relationship between anxiety levels and teacher rating. What should come next?
Probably the rating number with the standard deviation.
So are you referring to like mean and standard deviation of that variable?
Yeah.
So whenever you do a correlation, you don't have to do that. That is one of the things that is different between a t-test and a correlation. Because with a t-test, you really care about the means of each group, right? Because we're saying that's what the t-test does. We're saying, hey, these two means are different or are not different. With a correlation, we're doing something different. So we actually just jump right into the stats. So just like a t-test, we're going to say we have R, because instead of T, we're doing an R, a correlation coefficient. R degrees of freedom, which is n minus 2. So if we go all the way up here, it's 10 minus 8. So it's R degrees of freedom, which is 8, equals the correlation coefficient, which, if we go all the way back up here, the correlation coefficient between anxiety and teacher rating is negative 0.748. So typically we're going to round to 2 decimal places. So also start doing that within your own data. Just round to 2 decimal places. It makes things cleaner, and there even may be an APA like rule about it. But anyways, R parentheses 8 equals negative 0.75. What should come next? It's the same thing in the T statistic right up.
The p-value less than 0.05.
Perfect. So because we're doing SPSS output, it actually tells us what the p-value is. When you're doing like the critical values and you're seeing if something is significant or not at the 0.05 level, it doesn't actually tell you what the true significance level is. But with SPSS, it does. So instead of saying p less than 0.05, what we can now say is p equals 0.013. So we go up here, we can see p equals 0.013. So within this correlational matrix box, you can see we use all the numbers. We use n for determining the degrees of freedom, but we know that this is the R value, so we need to know, we need to report that. And then here's the sig level. We know we report that next. Cool. So what comes after, and this is different than a t-test, but what comes after the p-value?
Isn't it typically Cohen's d?
Yep, it is in t-test, but now we're going to do r squared. Very similar. So r squared is literally just taking the Pearson's R correlation coefficient and squaring it. So taking this negative 0.75 and just square it. So and pull out your calculators if you want, but negative 0.75 squared is 0.56. So yeah, so this is the write-up, and we have a little bit more, but this is the write-up of a correlation coefficient. You can see we have, according to a Pearson correlation analysis, we have the name of the test. We kind of interpret statistically what we found without using stats. There was a significant linear relationship between anxiety levels and teacher rating. Then we jump into R degrees of freedom equals the R value, the actual P value, and then just squaring the R value. So what should we do next? There's another sentence that we should have here right after this. What should it be? And not exactly, like, you don't have to tell me exactly what it says, but just tell me the general gist. What should we be talking about next?
You need to talk about what increases and decreases.
Yep. Perfect. So can someone tell me in words what we found? This negative correlation between anxiety and teacher rating.
That as anxiety goes up, teacher rating goes down.
Yep, perfect. And so there's like two different ways, there's multiple different ways to say this, but yes, you got it right. So we just describe what we found in words. So that is, students with higher levels of anxiety towards statistics classes tended to report lower teacher ratings. So you could also say something like lower levels of anxiety equals higher teacher ratings, or higher teacher ratings equal lower levels of anxiety. So there's multiple different ways you can say it, because remember, it doesn't matter which way you go. We're not saying, and this is something we should definitely not see on your write-up, that higher anxiety causes lower teacher ratings. No, we're not talking about causation. And we don't want to see this on your write-ups, because these are just major points taken off. Remember, we're doing a correlation, which just simply looks at the relationship between two variables. So we can just say people who reported higher this reported lower this, or people who reported lower X reported higher Y, and just insert your variables. Never say something causes something else. Are there any questions so far about writing up a significant correlation? All right. Next, let's go back up. Can someone tell me what variable, and this is kind of easy because of process of elimination, but what variable is not significantly correlated with anxiety?
Age.
Cool. Yep, age. And we know that because, one, there's no asterisk, but two, 0.934 is definitely not smaller than 0.05, so therefore we know it's not significant. So let's write that up. So once again, we start off with, according to a Pearson correlation analysis, then we talk about, in words, what was found. There was not a significant linear relationship between statistics, anxiety, and age. Then we report the stats again. R degrees of freedom 8 equals 0.03, because that was the R value, 0.03. P equals 0.93. So then we're done with the stats portion of this. Actually, we're done with it in total, because there's nothing to interpret, right? You can't say higher this reports lower that. Nope, there's just no relationship between the two variables. So then we're done. So this is how you report something if it's not significant. Are there any questions about reporting significant versus not significant, or how to determine if something's significant versus not significant using SPSS output?
When we don't use SPSS output, do we have to include the NS? That means
Yeah.
like significant. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I would include the NS, P, just NS, not significant.
Okay.
Or you can also say P is greater than 0.05. Another thing you're going to have to do in part B is interpret, it's like the last thing you do, I believe, is interpret the R squared. So essentially, once again, you just square the R and you provide a very simple interpretation. So for the R squared for anxiety and teacher rating, it's an R squared of 0.56. We've calculated that previously in our significant write-up. And the interpretation of it, it's a strong relationship. Then what does this 0.56 mean? It means that 56% of the variation in teacher ratings can be explained if we know the level of a student's statistics anxiety. So this is just something you have to do for 2 additional ones. Yeah, only 2 additional ones on assignment number 11. And that concludes part B. Are there any questions about part B? Yeah. So part C. So part C, you're going to have time to do this as a group. You need to write it up on your own, but you can work through together and create the scatter plot, create the output together, just so that way you can ask each other questions about actually how to do it, even though there are step-by-step instructions on the homework assignment. But for part C, you're going to need to create a scatter plot, and then you're going to run your correlation analysis, calculate the R squared for your variable, for your correlation, and then make sure you paste the scatter plot in the output. If you look at assignment number 11, there's a couple thought questions. You don't have to actually answer these thought questions. They're more there to help you think about your data and maybe incorporate some things into your results and your discussion. If you do actually put answers down, like if you type up answers to these thought questions, I'll take a look at them and provide feedback, but just know you don't actually have to do it. It's more just for you to think about your own data. Part D, was there any questions about part C?
No, but I did have a question about part B, sorry.
Yep, that's fine.
For the interpretation of the non-significant linear relationship, do we add another sentence?
No, you
Okay.
mean like after, like right here where it'd be,
Yes.
no, we don't add another sentence, because if we go back up to here, I mean, you could say there is no relationship, right? There is no relationship between X and Y, but you kind of already do it right here. There was not a significant linear relationship between stats, anxiety, and age. The reason why you put this extra sentence when it is significant is because you expand upon it. You explain that actual relationship, that as one goes up, another goes down, or as one goes up, the other variable goes up. You don't have that relationship, or you don't need to expand on it when it's not significant, because there's just no relationship. So you could follow up and say, this means there's no relationship, but you don't have to, because you already say it in the second part of the sentence.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. All right, so that was part C, which you're going to have time to start on as a group right after this PowerPoint. But part D is the write-up. You're going to write up the data analysis subsection of your methods. You can find some more information in the week 6 PowerPoint. There's a little bit more information about like how to actually do a methods. I believe back then we were like, I'm just going to briefly cover this, but you'll need it later. And there's more instructions on the assignment page. There's a lot of good instructions on assignment number 11. I highly suggest you read through them carefully, because they provide a lot of good information about what your paragraphs should include. So you need to write up the data analysis subsection of the methods, but then you also need to complete your write-up of the results. So this means editing your first draft. You wrote a first draft however many weeks ago, but then you also need to add the results of your one sample t-test. So, do some edits from assignment number 10. If you have any questions about how to incorporate feedback or how to write, an APA results for a t-test or a correlation, please let me know. I am available. So you need to add the results of your one sample t-test to your results page, as well as adding your correlational analysis with the interpretation. Are there any questions about Part D? You're writing up the data analysis and writing up and editing your results. Once again, more instructions are in assignment number 11. So here are my office hours for this week. I have hours from 4 to 5 today, and then from 9:30 to 11 and 1 to 2 on Thursday. And then on Saturday and Sunday, I'm available from 9:30 to 12 on both days. Thinking about the remainder of the class, remainder of the semester, I highly suggest, one, you should be working with your group, working on your PowerPoint presentation. You feel free to stop by my office hours and to run ideas by me. But really, I highly recommend you start working on editing your final paper, putting it together, going through it. I believe assignment number 12 talks more about it. You don't need to have it completed this weekend, obviously, or next weekend. It's due, I believe, the 1st. I could be wrong on that, so please double check the syllabus. But I've written a lot of papers in my life, and waiting the day before to do it, your life is not going to be fun, and you're not going to get a good grade on it. So please start incorporating my feedback from your intro, from your method section stuff that we've already done. Please start incorporating my feedback so that way just get a jump on it, get a head start on it, because you're not going to have a fun time if you wait until the weekend before, because you're going to run into problems potentially, or you just don't want to wait until the very end to do this. Because I know a lot of you, or not a lot, good bit of people have a lot of work they have to do with the intro. Some people just didn't even do the intro assignments and outlines, so they have to write the intro from scratch. I highly recommend you start doing that now, because if you have any questions, one, I can answer them, but two, you're not going to get a good grade if you wait until the very end to work on this paper. Are there any questions so far about assignment 11, assignment 10, or just this presentation or paper in general before I put people into breakout rooms? All right, I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and open up the breakout rooms so that way as a group you can work on Part B. Just remember, you can work on it together, actually doing the scatter plot and the correlation outputs, but when you write up stuff, make sure it's on your own. I'm going to go ahead and open all the rooms, and feel free to use the raise hand feature or the ask for help, and I can jump in and out of rooms if needed. All right, let's see here.